Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're zeroing in on one of the absolute most polarizing and honestly complex characters in modern British drama. We are breaking down J.B. Priestley's incredibly layered, allegorical character, Sybil Birling, from the iconic play An Inspector Calls. We're going to systematically strip away the formal dresses and polite parlor talk to examine exactly how Priestley uses her to deliver his piercing critiques of society.
Here is our roadmap for today. 1. The cold social superior. 2. Hypocrisy and prejudice. 3. Complicit in patriarchy. 4. The generational divide. And finally, 5. Refusing responsibility. Let's get right into it. Section 1. The cold social superior. Right off the bat, Mrs. Birling strikes us as this incredibly rigid, unyielding figure. She's someone who cares deeply about outward appearances, strict social etiquette, and keeping absolute order in her household. In fact, before she even speaks a single line of dialogue, J.B. Priestley gives us these opening stage directions. He tells the actors in the audience that she is about 50, a rather cold woman, and her husband's social superior. Notice that instant clash? She has this elevated social status, but absolutely zero human warmth. Priestley's word choice here is absolutely deliberate. Take that adjective, cold. It's fascinating because back in 1912, being loving, maternal, and sensitive was basically the ultimate societal expectation for women. So describing a mother as cold was practically an oxymoron. And then there's the phrase, social superior. This tells us so much about the rigid class system of the time. Her husband Arthur might have all that newly made industrial cash, but Sybil, she comes from old wealth and reputable lineage. From an analytical standpoint, Priestley is literally using her as a symbol for the emotional detachment and extreme individualism of the upper classes. I mean, she goes as far as policing her husband's language, just so he doesn't sound too working class.
So that brings us to a massive contradiction. We know she sits on the board of a prominent charity organization, so how on earth does a supposedly respectable charity worker justify denying crucial aid to a destitute, pregnant woman?
Well, let's unpack that in Section 2, Hypocrisy and Class Prejudice.
Her sheer dismissiveness is perfectly captured in this line. I don't suppose for a moment that we can understand why the girl committed suicide. Girls of that class?
Okay, listen closely to the micro-language at play here. See that diminishing use of the noun girls? Eva Smith is a fully grown woman, but Sybil literally infantilizes her just to maintain a sense of superiority. But even more importantly, look at the word that in that class. It's an alienating determiner. It instantly throws up this concrete social barrier. Her ingrained snobbery entirely strips Eva Smith of her individual humanity, framing the working class as this vague other that's fundamentally different from and inferior to herself.
Quick tip for those of you studying this play or really wanting to nail Priestley's genius: accuracy matters. When you're breaking down phrases like that class, correctly identifying the grammatical parts like that alienating determiner really locks in your understanding of her prejudice. Using the exact terminology is a real game changer for your analysis.
All right, back to the hypocrisy. On one hand, she parades around with this prestigious title of a prominent member of a charity organization. But on the other, she abuses that power to deny Eva aid, condemning her desperate plea as a piece of gross impertinence. She's literally using arbitrary prejudice, basically Eva just daring to use the Birling name, to withhold vital life-saving help. Priestley is using this exact moment to argue that relying on private, upper-class charity is a deeply flawed system, precisely because it's controlled by people with these toxic prejudices.
Which leads us to another really interesting question. If she is so utterly obsessed with rules, respectability, and looking perfect, why does she so readily tolerate her husband's infidelity?
Let's find out in Section 3, Complicit in the Patriarchy. Just to make sure we're all on the exact same page, let's quickly define patriarchy. It's essentially a societal system where men hold the primary power and women are largely excluded from it. Now, in 1912, this dictated everything from voting rights right down to who controlled the finances. So let's see how this plays out inside Mrs. Birling's own home.
She actually tells her daughter Sheila, when you're married, you realize that men with important work to do sometimes have to spend nearly all their time and energy on their business. You'll have to get used to that, just as I had. Now, business here is just a polite euphemism for extramarital affairs. She is giving us clear-cut evidence of her pragmatic, totally conditioned acceptance of male infidelity. She basically accepts this humiliation as the necessary price tag for her financial security and social status.
But here's the kicker. She isn't just a passive victim in all this. She actively enforces this system on others. She views marriage primarily as a transaction for status. Historically, women of her class actually opposed the suffrage movement because rocking the political boat threatened their comfortable, privileged lives. And she enforces this domestic submission right onto her own daughter. Whenever Sheila expresses progressive views or shows genuine emotion, Mrs. Birling attacks her as a hysterical child. This is a classic ad hominem attack. By diagnosing Sheila with hysteria, which was a historical term used to control women, she completely dismisses her daughter's valid arguments by framing emotion as a dangerous weakness.
Moving right along to Section 4, the generational divide.
Priestley sets up a truly brilliant contrast here. Just look at Mrs. Birling's static, conservative denial. She says, "I accept no blame for it at all." Notice the absolute language there? Now contrast that with Sheila's progressive, remorseful acceptance. "I know I'm to blame and I'm desperately sorry." Priestley impartially uses these two women to showcase a clear societal divide. You've got the older generation who are stubborn, stuck in the past, and fiercely protective of their wealth. And then you have the younger generation who actually show the potential for remorse, for change, and for swapping out those outdated views for a much more collective mindset.
Another quick analytical pro tip here. Look at the parallels. You don't always have to analyze a character in total isolation. Watching Sheila actively reject her mother's manipulation, even calling out her formal vocabulary, like calling the word impertinent silly, is actually a fantastic way to witness Mrs. Birling's loss of power by proxy.
And that brings us to our final point, Section 5, refusing social responsibility.
If we track her character development, or honestly, her total lack of it, across the timeline of the play, we see a completely static trajectory. In Act 1, she's dismissive of the lower classes. In Act 2, we find out she actively abused her power to deny Eva charity. And by Act 3, the second she thinks the inspector might just be a hoax, she immediately celebrates and rejects his entire message of collective responsibility. From the first curtain drop to the very last, she remains completely ideologically unchanged. And this right here brilliantly illustrates Priestley's ultimate critique of her morality. When the horrifying truth finally comes out that her son Eric exploited Eva, which led to the death of both Eva and Sybil's own unborn grandchild, her main reaction is captured in the stage direction and quote, "Shocked? Eric? You stole money?" It's wild, right? She is profoundly horrified by financial crime against capitalist property, but she is entirely numb to the catastrophic loss of human life.
So, wrapping up the analysis techniques, always remember that Priestley's methods directly serve his core themes. The heavy dramatic irony in Act 2, where she's unknowingly cursing her own son, and her absolute unyielding language, it all points back to one thing: her total failure to accept social responsibility. She is Priestley's ultimate symbol of extreme, dangerous individualism.
We'll leave you with this final thought. Mrs. Birling is static. She finishes the play exactly as cold and unyielding as she started it. But you know, the play wasn't written for her. It was written for the audience. So ask yourself, if Sybil Birling learned absolutely nothing from the inspector's visit, what is Priestley demanding that we learn from her deeply flawed worldview? Keep that provocative question in mind as you analyze not just the play, but the society around you. Thanks for joining us for this explainer.